the I think you just have to kind of accept the record. Also, why don't I start us off by reading a few questions from the Q&A. Nothing major. They're actually more logistically oriented. There was a question about whether you needed to submit a concept or idea for the final project for approval. That is optional. It will show up in about week 6 or 7. I can't remember which week it shows up, but you don't have to do it. You're not graded for it, but it's just a good way for students to interact with each other and feedback and support on that topic. As you kind of have an idea, other students in your group might have good suggestions. So it's, again, no grade, but it is an optional assignment that will be coming up. You might have noted that there is a TA assigned to your small group. So the discussions are going to be within one small group that will be sustained throughout the quarter. That will give you an opportunity to have some really good interaction with the same group of people, and kind of build a small community during this time. It's a really, really large class. This is the largest class I've ever taught, is this class. And that's because when they assign 2 professors, Fuller needs to make their money back. Wait, is this being recorded? Fuller needs to make their money back. So they cram as many students into this class as possible. Hence the very, very large class. And again, part of it is because you have two full-time faculty teaching this course. What that means is, obviously, it's much harder to get to know everybody. And then on top of that, it's a Zoom class or an asynchronous online class. So this will give us an opportunity in a smaller group setting to get to know each other a little bit. So we're going to retain those groups throughout, and then your final project, they'll be graded externally, of course, but your group will provide that feedback. So you can post to your group, hey, I'm thinking of working on this, then they'll be able to provide that feedback as well. So look for the TA that's assigned for your particular group if you have any specific questions, particularly about grading or things of that sort, because they will be able to handle that question more directly. Larger questions, of course, Dr. Bantu and I are more than willing to address. But logistically speaking, the best first line to address is there is a TA assigned to each group. And, correspond with that particular TA if you have any kind of logistical questions or questions about the assignments. Well, let's open it up and see if there's questions. We can use the hand raise function. It's probably the best way to do it, just to kind of keep it as straightforward as possible. I think I addressed the 2 questions that were on there. There was a question that just went up. It says, when should we plan on having the event finished before you write about it? Well, it should be finished before you write about it, obviously. But that's kind of up to you. There's no, we're not going to patrol the deadlines of when your event is done, but you should have some kind of thing to reflect on. So it should have occurred then. And now, if you're a fast writer, maybe you can do it 2 days before and then get it all written up or done, all of that done earlier, as soon as possible. But because you are reflecting and writing about an event that you have done or participated in, then it should happen. We're not going to control, you have to get it done by this particular date. That's kind of, graduate students can figure out, in order for me to do a thorough write-up, I need to do it by X number of days. So there's no deadline on when that event should be, but the ultimate deadline is, of course, you have a paper due that writes about a past event. Luke, your hand is raised. We see that hand.
Yeah. Thanks. Sorry, I'm listening to 2 class meetings at the same time, so I might have missed it, but I think just now you mentioned about the final project and the groups, but the question I was trying to ask on the Q&A was about, it sounds like we're supposed to share our letter to the church with our groups too. So maybe you answered that and I missed it, but like this week we're supposed to post our letter to the church and then talk about it?
Yes, that's the bulletin board assignment. There is no discussion board assignment except the letter to the church.
Yeah, is there a place to post it? Because the
There
other day there
should
wasn't.
be. There should be. Let's double
Maybe
check.
somebody else knows where it is, but
There should be. Um, was the assignment not automatically posted as a discussion board?
I couldn't find it, but maybe somebody else did.
It's not in a discussion board. It's like a normal submission
And there's no.
paper, but it's not connected to a discussion board.
Okay, let me do
Yeah, you
this.
can submit the assignment, but we won't be able to see each other's, I don't think.
I'll do this now because I think in the past I've been able to allow assignments once it's submitted to be posted automatically. It looks like that hasn't happened. So we will try to do this. in the
Okay,
next-
thanks.
Even maybe even tonight. Create a discussion board where each person will have to go back and post their letter on the discussion board. I thought it was automatic, but apparently it's not. So that's what to look for this week. Go ahead and once that's set up, I'll send an announcement so that you can read each other's discussion board comments.
In that discussion board comments, are we meant to like comment on two people's papers like normal, or there's?
Yes, I hold on a second. Let me check the sheet here. It is 1 point to respond to a classmate's letter. And the way that's been graded is you get half a point for each response you do for your fellow classmates.
So we have, say we have 5 in a group. We respond to all 4 people and we get 2 points total.
No, sorry. You're supposed to do 2. Oh, that's sneaky. You're trying to get extra points here.
No, that was the math.
I know. That's my fault. I didn't explain it well. You get in the past, what you've noticed, hopefully, is that when you respond to a classmate, you're supposed to do at least 2. So you get up to a point, half point each. If you do more, you get extra credit in heaven and God loves you more. But we would not give you those extra points. But God does love you a lot more when you get those extra points.
You know, there's always a system in a game.
Actually, so on the syllabus, there
gotta
isn't
figure it
any
out.
listed. So this week is extra credit anyway, because on the syllabus, there's no discussion listed for this week. Is that right?
There should be. If you look at the assignment due dates, it'll give you the points. And the points are more accurate on that. This is updated, actually. So if you go to the syllabus, there should be a witness and justice assignment due dates. And that will give you the dates for when various assignments are due and the points associated with them. The posting of the because it's optional, it won't be listed because you're not getting points for posting your topic. But what you'll notice if you open that document is week 4, respond to classmates letter, you get 1 point. And I'm sorry, that is updated from the syllabus. My apologies.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, that's an update from the.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So that will give you the points you get for, and like there's, in order to kind of make the points work, there's some minor changes. So for example, week 10 discussion board, final reflections, you get 1 point for posting. You're not required to respond. Again, if you do, wonderful. Jesus loves you more, but you're not required to do so. So that will give you the point breakdown on the discussion board. You get 20 points for discussion, like 2 for your initial post and 1 for the 2 follow-up posts. Cedric has his hand raised.
Yeah, just real quick for the letter to the church. Do we have the option of doing like a podcast or something like that?
Yes, I believe that we'd offer that as an option. Yeah.
Okay. And
Some kind of, yes. Some kind of like whatever, I mean, I think in parentheses wrote blog, like if that's the mode of communication that you feel is like the best way to communicate, like, I don't think anybody would do this, but if you're writing as like a 20-year-old in your community, that probably you'll do a TikTok video. You might not do a letter in that formal sense of the word, But the idea is we want to hear how you understand the community and how that community, and because you've done the work, you've asked the questions, what's the community saying? And a letter is the most straightforward format. But if it's like a blog that you would post somewhere on Facebook, or as has been mentioned, some kind of video or some kind of podcast type of format, that's just limited by creativity, but also the appropriateness of it. The most straightforward is the letter, because that's the most common way someone would communicate to a church.
Gotcha.
Anthony, Anthony's hands up.
Yeah, just reading your books before and during this class and listening to your lectures, I feel like the evangelical movement and the racial tension has upped a notch since Trump and since the pandemic. And I've been craving to hear like your recent thoughts. So I've read your books, and I feel like we are somewhere else, which I want to hear from you and from Dr. Bantu of where are we now? Because more of what I'm hearing from you is like a few years back.
Yeah, I'll start, and Dr. Bantu can kind of, I know you have thoughts on this as well. So I'll tell you kind of my process on this. One is I am currently working on a book that's due, was due actually last month, but I will submit it in March. By the way, on those late assignments, do as I say, not as I do. Just because I'm late to my publisher doesn't mean you're going to be 3 months late with us. Anyway, so I'm working on this book, and it's about African-American evangelicalism that emerged in the 1960s and 1970s. And one of the themes that's going to come up is that the more things change, the more things stay the same. And that there are certain themes within evangelicalism, and that's why I'm going back to the roots of contemporary evangelicalism. Distinction is, and it's made in Gary and I's book, lowercase e is a much longer narrative of 2,000 years of church history. And you can see evangelicalism in St. Patrick, even though he's a Catholic. You can see evangelicalism in Martin Luther, even though that's many, many hundreds of years ago. So lowercase evangelicalism kind of sees itself in the long thread of biblical Christian orthodoxy. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that's the self-perception of evangelicals. We're in the long line of orthodoxy. Uppercase evangelicalism, which Gary and I distinguish, is the more recent phenomenon that starts in the 60s and 70s and really hits its heyday in the 1990s. And that comes out, Fuller is part of that movement. Certainly the mega churches that come out of the 80s and 90s, the Saddlebacks and the Willow Creek, certainly in the early stages, it's the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. And then you also get very strongly the formation around parachurches like Varsity, Campus Crusade, Young Life, Youth for Christ, even some of the other organizations like World Vision, Compassion International. These are all evangelical organizations and institutions and parachurches that kind of start in the 50s, post-World War II, and then really kind of become more significant in the 60s and 70s, and then really kind of hit their height in the 1990s. So what I describe in my writing so far, and the sample that I sent that's going to be published in the Scottish Bulletin, something Scottish. They changed all my Z's to S's. That was the major edit they made. Organization is apparently spelled with an S over there in Scotland. But anyway, so you get that story that I pointed out for you or sent to you. I'm trying to trace how it transitions from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s iteration of evangelicalism, capital E, very strongly US based, some influence in North America and Canada, but really very clearly an evangelical US based movement. How that movement starts off theological and then really shifts to more sociological and then culminates in what we saw in the last 5 years, almost exclusively a political movement. I can't remember if I told this story in one of the lectures, and I have it in other contexts. This was about 5 years ago. I get a call from the Wall Street Journal, and it's a reporter asking me to talk about evangelical Christianity. It was, I think they had somehow seen my book and they wanted to ask me questions about evangelicalism. And I was on the phone for an hour with this reporter, and afterwards, I by the way, I didn't make it. My words didn't quite make it into the newspaper. But the reporter, I asked her afterwards, so tell me how you got, and she said at the beginning, I do the evangelical beat for the Wall Street Journal. I cover anything related to evangelicalism for the Wall Street Journal. So I asked her, well, how did you get that, position? That's fantastic. She said, well, I'm not Christian. I said, oh, I'm actually Jewish. I said, well, then what was did you study religion in college? She said, no, I was a political science major. And that political science major actually made me, in the eyes of the Wall Street Journal, better equipped to report on evangelicalism than the fact that I'm Jewish and the fact that I have no background in actual Christianity. So I think that's kind of a parable or an indication of how much evangelicalism is now identified in almost exclusively political terms. Now, that doesn't mean that there is a conflation and a mixing up of evangelical ecclesiology and evangelical social political identity. And that's where it's kind of really tricky right now. And it's particularly tricky for those of us who are evangelicals, who are people of color, African American, Latino, Native American, Asian American, those of us who embrace the larger evangelical movement with the lowercase e, right? So that would be, hey, we love the Bible. We believe in active faith that reaches out with evangelism and justice. We believe in the centrality of Jesus and the importance of Jesus and the Christology. We believe in, these are kind of the basic Bevington's quadrilateral. There's just a number of different writings that tries to summarize evangelicalism, and they tend to be theologically, biblically defined. But what has happened is that biblical, theological, ecclesial definition of evangelicalism has really been pushed aside and replaced by the social, political, cultural definition of evangelicalism, which is white, suburban, upper middle class, and now the Trump evangelicals. And there was an article in the New York Times, I think, about this, that many of those who are the Trump evangelicals are not really evangelicals Christians. They don't go to church. They don't read their Bible. They clearly don't listen to their pastors about certain things, or they do about certain things. So their evangelical identity is not, if you quiz them on what's your understanding of Christology, about Jesus' death on the cross, what do you understand about the life of the church? What does the sacraments and ordinances mean to you? Many of the Trump evangelicals would not pass that test. Do you consider church attendance to be important? Do you read your Bible every day? Many of the Trump evangelicals, according to this article in the New York Times, would not pass that test, but they're considered evangelical because it is now so much more of a political label. And like I said, it's left many of us who embrace the theological definition of evangelicalism. We're kind of out in the cold right now. And that's what I'm writing in my last section of my book about. Many evangelicals of color are leaving, are abandoning ship. But I said this a few years ago at a conference on evangelicalism. It's not that we're abandoning ship, meaning evangelicals of color. You all kept moving the markers. So, if I'm talking for myself, my evangelical card is laminated. It is like sealed in blood. I mean, it's the real deal. My evangelical creds go deep. I was on staff of a university. I went to Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. I was a part of a denomination, evangelical denomination. I served in the World Vision Board, on the CCDA board. You cut me, I bleed evangelicalism. So none of my perspectives changed on any of this. I didn't overnight say, oh, I don't believe any of that anymore. I still have a deep respect and honoring of evangelical theology. What I say to white evangelicals is that you all moved the markers. You all kept changing the rules on me. And so I never left evangelicalism. You booted me out. without like letting me know that my laminated card doesn't work anymore. So that's kind of my frustration, because I think many evangelicals of color, and I can name names, and I will in the book. I won't name names here, but these are good friends, who after 20, 30, 40 years, especially after the last 5 years, are not saying we're leaving you all, but you kind of move the markers in the definition, and we're not comfortable with those definitions. Sorry, that was a long, drawn out answer for a very good, insightful, short question. Dr. Bantu, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I'll just be brief because in case other folks got questions too, but this is good stuff. And Dr. Ryan and I've talked about this a lot, just in private conversations over a beer. But yeah, man, I'm not evangelical. I don't claim that term for myself. I got saved. Look, man, I got saved when I was 8 years old. I gave my life to Jesus Christ, and I was evangelizing when I was 12 years old. Man, the Lord called me. The Holy Spirit showed up and told me to be a pastor when I was 16. I didn't know what the hell an evangelical was. Like, I had been following Jesus for like over 10 years by the time I was 19, and I went to, a Christian college where I met Dr. Ra, and all of a sudden I kept hearing this word evangelical left and right. And I was like, what is that? And then at first it's like, oh, okay, it's, believe in Jesus, believe in the Bible. I'm like, okay, yeah. But then I'm seeing the political associations and like the fact that, again, in the Black church, nobody calls himself evangelical, right? You're saved, you're filled with the Holy Ghost, you're saved and sanctified, right? Like, but nobody walks around calling himself evangelical now, and so for me, and I get into this in Gospel Hyman note, I'm saying that there's an imperialism and a triumphalism and a white supremacy that's at the very origins of Moody and Gordon and, Billy Graham and all of that stuff. So for me, evangelical is not something that I identify with. I identify with Jesus. That's the quick thing I'll say.
Sorry, I just had to tell this one ending story though, and this is a positive one. So those of you all know that this last weekend we had the installation of Dr. David Goatley as the 6th president. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. Fuller has a 75-year history, and it's only had 5 presidents. And those 5 presidents are it's like a who's who of evangelical Christianity. Harold Ockenga, Carnell, Mao, Hubbard. I mean, and Laberton. That's it. Those are the 5. Is that 5? Yeah, that's it. I mean, think about those 5 names that have been the presidents, and now Dr. Goatley, the first African American, but like not the first non-white to be the president of Fuller Seminary. Now, Walter Kim was the president of the NAE. It was the first Asian American to be the president of the NAE. He's a good friend, and he showed up. He squeezed it into his schedule. He's like flew in and flew out, because he saw this as one of these kind of very significant moments for evangelical Christianity, for an African-American, Dr. Goatley, to become the president of Fuller. Fuller is one of those stalwart evangelical institutions. Now, those of you who saw it on video stream, this is how I'm going to close my book. That moment where Dr. Bill Pennell, who is actually proudly very featured in my book, was a professor at Fuller for many years, was Tom Skinner's main associate, one of the key framers of Black evangelicalism over the last 50 plus years. No, longer than that. Dr. Pennell, gets up there and he puts the stole on Dr. Goatley. And there's a moment where Dr. Pennell has his arms and his hands on Dr. Goatley's shoulders. And it was I was weeping because I was behind that scene. I was weeping because what was happening was this kind of passing on of the mantle by Dr. Pennell to Dr. Goatley. And Dr. Goatley, during his interviews, said, I'm an evangelical, but I'm coming through it through other streams. So, he doesn't hang out with the evangelical hipsters. His formation is in the Black church, but he understands the evangelical theological movement. And so he's able to speak into that. I mean, he might not be best friends with Tim Keller and, those cats, but he really gets the evangelical narrative. So that's what's so exciting to see, again, that moment where Dr. Pennell is just it was a long moment. It was a beautiful, beautiful moment, laying hands on Dr. Goatley. That to me was a positive. And it's one of the few kind of positive lights that I've seen where evangelicalism is now not just defined, hopefully, by white middle class, upper middle class, Republican, hyper reform guys. There's a broader story to this. The anxiety, of course, is that where does Fuller fit in evangelicalism now? We were already kind of being shown the door in some evangelical circles, and this might seal the deal. Say no, you don't feel it as anymore. So that actually might happen as well.
I guess I keep wondering why we try to keep fitting in a box, and like I feel like the focus is all evangelicalism when we have so many more streams that we can learn from, even in when we talk about evangelicalism.
I'll be crass about it. Evangelicals got a lot of money. And again, I'm being kind of crass and joking about this on one level, but like I said, my card is laminated. I signed that thing in blood, metaphorically speaking, of course. And now, it's like, oh, we changed the rules. I'm like, no, you ever hear that old story from Tony Campolo? He talks about it was a white church that he grew up in, and then the neighborhood changed and it became a black neighborhood and became a black church. And Campolo was formed in that black church, but he said the reason that he refused to leave was that his family paid for the offering plates, and they were not, they wanted to take the plates with them, or they were going to have to stay because the offering plates were paid for by that family. So that's kind of how I'm feeling a little bit. It's like, I put some investment in this thing, whether I wanted to or not. It was, for whatever reason, the pathway that God had kind of made, having gone to Gordon Conwell, having, done all these things that, and to be blunt about it, there are certain places I can't go now because I'm too evangelical in my history, right? So, there are institutions that see me as too evangelical because I have a Gordon Conwell degree and because I have written for evangelical publishers. They say, well, we can't hire you. And you feel that. I mean, Vince, I don't know if you feel this, like going to AAR, there are kind of certain circles where like, oh, you're an evangelical, or your education's evangelical. Well, then, you don't really fit here. And I can sense that. So it's not so much that, yeah, there are other streams, and, I've learned from those other streams. I've learned from the Duke scholars and the Harvard scholars, and I'm blessed by those scholars. But my identity has been shaped by evangelicalism. So I can't walk away from it that easily. There's the other part that's been happening, the glass cliff narrative, where people of color are being put into positions of leadership in evangelical organization just as they're going off the cliff. And so they become presidents of seminaries that are just about to fold, or they become leaders of denominations that are headed towards a train wreck. I've seen that a few times with smaller organizations, where organizations that are turned over to people of color, they're kind of about to flame out. And one of the big things that happened, and I'm going back to that crass comment, is that the donors pulled out. And that essentially leaves these evangelical associations to completely fall apart. I'm not going to name names, but there was a prominent evangelical association. When an African American took over that organization, there were a number of donors and board members who pulled out. And when that happens, it devastates the organization. And that's the whole glass cliff idea, that you had these organizations that were vibrant under white founders, but then within a very brief period of time, you see them go off that glass cliff. You all are getting the most cynical side of me today. I'm like ranting here. Sorry, man. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm more cynical than you because, like I said, I'm out. I got out like the movie, and so that's why I'm chilling. And so, but I think it's cool that Dr. Ryan and I have these different perspectives, because I think God will call people in those perspectives, like man, why evangelicals? They come for me. I be trying to like get away from me. I be like, I don't want to. I get these invitations. I'm like, I don't want to be. I'm trying to be over here in the black church and the black community and all that, and be in these other places. But I want to be obedient, and if the door is open, But I'll just add real quick to what you said, Kelly. That I jumped out of my seat when you said that, because that's my thing. Is yes, like the dominant church is not the only model of church. And so we don't need to, my thing is, and I'm gonna say that I just want to say we're gonna get to this towards the end of class. We're gonna have some lectures on what evangelism looks like, you know, in coming out of other contexts, because it's not the only model. And my thing is this: even if you are always constantly even critiquing the dominant church, that is still also a way of empowering them, because they are still controlling the narrative, controlling your attention, controlling your emotions, controlling how much hair you lose, like all of that stuff. And it's like God is moving in other places, and God is often moving in the margins. So that's my heartbeat, is to I want to be in the margins, and I'm happy to partner with people of privilege and dominance, as to the degree that they are actually genuinely willing to empower the margins. I am not interested in arguing or like trying to get someone to, no, because God has sent you so many prophets and you've literally killed them. And so like but if people are down and they're like, you know, like Barnabas, who sold his field and said, I want to be with the apostles. Zacchaeus repaid everybody all that he cheated. I'm like, then I'm gonna be like Jesus and be like, hey, salvation's come to this house, so we down, right? And if somebody else tries to come at them, no, they down. But you got to be down though. And so anyway, just wanted to add that right quick.
Yeah, thank you. I just kind of felt like, yeah, we're playing the rules, the game by their rules, and it's like I don't want to play the game.
Anthony, I'm assuming your hands was for the previous question. I see Suzanne next, and then Felipe after Suzanne. Go ahead.
So, Dr. Jarrell and Bantu, as I'm listening to the glass cliff analogy, the idea or the truth that there's a lot of money in the evangelical big E world, that and that it's rooted in so much prejudice, racism, misuse of privilege, everything, then like so my perspective, obviously I am a white woman who's had horrible experiences in portions of the evangelical church to now that I don't identify anymore. I'm part of the Episcopal Church, but worked for an SBC church, and it was just have experienced the what it's like to be an unwelcome woman in leadership spaces. So as I'm listening to this, and I don't want to say, you know, burn the house down, but how does one, and I agree with when you said, Dr. Bantu, that, you know, attention, it feeds the beast. So how do we not feed the beast and take what, I mean, if there's good to take, that's debatable on certain quarters, but if we can take what good there is to take and move away, because if the money is tied to the power, is tied to the wealth, is tied to the privilege, is tied to things that it is tied to the whiteness of it, what are our options going forward? I mean, I was thrilled to see Dr. Goatley installed this weekend. That was amazing. How do we at Fuller in seminary, how do we keep changing that narrative without feeding the beast with attention?
Oh, did you want to say anything, Dr. Rock? Or yeah. I mean, yeah, I would say just a few quick comments, because I think we got, but yeah, I would just say, like, I feel like a lot of times, this might go against people's theology, you know, like people have different theologies of like providence and free will, but just for me, I like to live in the tension of acknowledging both of them. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, I don't think that everything that happens is like every little thing is like God making it happen. I do believe that people make decisions and things happen. So if I get a job offer, or if I get a book contract offer, or if I get an invitation to speak somewhere, I'm not always like, oh, God must have did this. Like, this is God opening the door. I'm like, well, sometimes it's people with money, and and they got that money in wrong ways also. And I don't know, Holy Spirit, you got to let me know. And so I also like have to control, in a sense, like how I spend my time and energies, because I would fill up my every moment of my calendar in white evangelicalism if I responded to everything, you know what I'm saying? And then like on the flip side, like I have the privilege and blessing of being given a seat and opportunities to, like, for example, teach and speak and work in like Native American context and like Asian American context and you know, these other contexts, and of course including my own, that I've honestly had to go out of my way to get into those spaces, and not in a like a colonial kind of way, but like just to find them and then just sit and be invited and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't just happen, you know what I'm saying? Whereas like white evangelical invitations, they just happen all day, every day. And it's like, I don't want to just be like, oh, this must be God. I'm like, well, I don't know if it is actually. And so I have to try to control how I spend my energy and time based on the convictions and the values that God has given me. And so, like, for example, my second book, I published it with a Black publisher on purpose. You know, like, just keeping it real, like the resources are like night and day in terms of the publisher that I worked with, this Black Christian publisher, and then these white evangelical publishers or university presses. But I did that on purpose because I want to be able to, like, again, support platforms of color and in my way as a scholar, you know. And so that's just one example. But anyway, I hope that kind of answers the question. And so I think, yeah, for me, just like, I don't want to go to the other extreme either and be like an anarchist, or just be like, you know, like an atheist and be like, oh, nothing, you know, God, the spirit is always moving. But I just feel like sometimes we just want to kind of like act like everything that happens, every opportunity that presents itself is automatically God. And I just feel like we need to step back a little bit. And for me, my guiding passage is 1 Corinthians 12, 21 through 26. And I'm gonna talk about this more later in the class, but it's like, there's some parts of the body that have just gotten way too much attention, and that grieves the Holy Spirit. And there are other parts of the body that have not gotten nearly enough. And it's like 1 Corinthians 12 is literally calling the body of Christ to acknowledge the unequal distribution of resources that exists in worldly systems, and then to do the opposite in terms of how we prioritize our attention and resources and time and money as well.
Yes, and this will come up in a future lecture, I think week 6. I'll talk about what's called counter narratives. How do you identify the broken narratives, dysfunctional narratives, and create and generate the counter narratives? So that to me is one of the changes that I've started thinking about. And I mentioned this earlier on. We have to confront evil in its proper geography. This is Stephen Mott's quote, that for so long we've only worked on the individual level, or we worked on the systemic level. We need to add the narrative level, but it's all three. We don't neglect any pieces of that. So for me personally, I've found that the best way to stay sane is do these things through relationships. And that's a huge deal because you have to, one, commit to these relationships. And, you know, we all of us have a finite amount of time that we can commit to building relationships. But the ones that I've sustained relationships with over now several decades, and the ones that have kind of walked through situations both thick and thin, and, you know, tough, difficult, those folks, and that includes white folk, that includes the whole range. These are the folks that I know I want to walk through again in whatever iteration comes next. So I don't want to ignore the personal, interpersonal part of it. But I'm also, you know, I want to change systems and structures. I want to see the system of evangelicalism oftentimes expressed through parachurches and denominations and seminaries and those kinds of institutions. So I want to be on those boards, and I want to be in these spaces where I'm influencing, hopefully, Fuller Seminary, and influencing, hopefully, Young Life, because I consult for them as a theological, you know, those are places that I feel like, yeah, I could actually have a hand in changing systems and structures. And all of that comes back to, well, what are the counter narratives that I'm demonstrating? So again, confronting evil in its proper geography. And we're all wired differently to be able to do certain things in certain spaces. But I would say, you know, look for the places where you can do all three and not just one, but also recognize that there's kind of particular strengths that God has given to us to be able to do well. Felipe, I think you were next with a question.
Yeah. So this is, and I think it's like really raw. So I apologize because I'm still like processing the mass shootings right here in Monterey Park. where it's a very unique situation because, I'm new to the community, but we have like a majority Asian American community. And we have, through other churches, like a really close relationship to the city leaders. So we have been, participating in vigils and times of prayer. But I just feel like I guess in regards to mass shootings and particularly learning how to, just develop this vocabulary of lament. Any thoughts on how, I mean, like to because it feels like some even friends like really struggling to find the vocabulary, and people I pass are really some in denial or shock, particularly from the Asian American community. So any thoughts on that? How I really want to explore this further, not only in the context of this class, but for the ministry, especially as we're planting a church. I think like this is such a time to move us to, really, lament and do something about it. So how do we go about that?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say it was so great to see you on that day, on Sunday. So those of you who know some of the background, Saturday night, which was the eve of Lunar New Year, Monterey Park, which I was told is 61% Asian American, 30% Latino. Those, I mean, so it's a majority immigrant, non-white community. Anglos make up like 6% of that community. So, and Monterey Park, if you know the geography, is kind of at the heart of San Gabriel Valley, which is a very heavily Asian community. My most favorite dim sum restaurant is right in Monterey Park, and it's actually a mecca of sorts for Asian Americans, particularly Chinese Americans. It's kind of where all the great restaurants are. It's like where the social life and many of the churches even are kind of in this SGV Valley, SGV area. In fact, one of the first and most prominent Asian American churches, Evergreen, that Ken Fong pastored for many years, is not in Monterey Park, like the next town over. So the whole area has been kind of a hotbed for Asian and Asian American immigrant narratives. And as many of you know, the violence that occurred was actually a 72-year-old, I believe, Vietnamese man who shot up a dance studio. 11 people are now pronounced dead. Everybody was over the age of 60. So this was a shooting of elderly, and all were Asian American or Asian American, I believe, maybe one, non-Asian in the mix. So obviously this is a devastating event for the community. And I would say, first off, thank you for being there. When I got the call to try to come to this event, I was really praying, Lord, that there be some local churches that show up. And I was very thankful that there were a number of local churches from the community and nearby that showed up. I think that was the first step to lament alongside. And, you kind of being there to support the civic leaders. I believe the new mayor is a young Asian American. I mean, like he just started like today or something like that. I mean, imagine your first day on your job is to try to deal with what's going on in your community like that. So how can the church support him? And I think the act of lament is not a passive act. And I did this 2 nights ago at a church planters gathering, and these were church planters from all over, and I led a time of lament. And I didn't vocalize this, but what I was thinking is, if these church planters, and I asked them to do two things. One, pray for the dead bodies in their community, because there's always dead bodies in your community, meaning there's a history that's been buried, meaning that there are, in some cases, literally dead bodies. So I actually read the names of the dead bodies in our community now, Monterey Park, and I read the names of the Atlanta shooting victims, because these were dead bodies for the AAPI community. That was hugely significant. And I didn't say this to the church planting group, but I said, if you can't recognize the dead bodies in your community, then why the blank are you planting a church in that community? You don't give a blank about that community because you don't know the dead bodies in that community. You're there. You can be in any community if you don't know the dead bodies. And the second prayer was, can you pray a prayer on behalf of the community? Because what I noted in the book of prophetic lament is that in Lamentations 5, the hope emerges because the people began to pray for themselves. The tone and the point of view shifts away from the lament that kind of is diffuse and coming from all over the place, by chapter 5, the people are empowered enough to be able to pray for themselves. And that to me is one of the things that Christian communities can do. Not that we are front and center in praying, but we empower the community to be able to pray directly to God for themselves. And that again would be the two. If I'm talking to church planners, I said, if you can't do if you don't know these two things, if I'm asking you to pray right now for the dead bodies in your community, it means you don't know the history. And then, you need to get out. And you can't pray on behalf of the community like that letter that we're writing. It's a genuine reflection of, I know this community well enough to say what their concerns are, what their laments are. That to me is the first two steps. Again, for church planters especially, I was like, if you can't do those two things, then you really shouldn't be church planting that community, because you don't know that community well enough. And once you get the sense of this is the lament of that community, that's when the response can come. Not like beforehand coming in and say, oh, I already figured out what you all need because I'm a new church planner and I have a college degree somewhere and I have a seminary degree. So, I've already figured it out. No, you're listening to the community to such an extent, lamenting alongside, that the answers are coming from the community itself.
Thank you. So it's basically like this is a really right time to really learn about the community, right? Like in this time of pain and suffering. So
yes, and you will hear truth from the community during these times. That's why lament is so powerful, because lament is truth. And many times in church contexts, and things are changing a little bit, but people come to church to put on a particular persona, to perform, right? To perform their Christian duty, to perform their holiness, whatever. I mean, that's the sad reality of many of our church life. We go to perform for about an hour. We sing along with all the right songs, and we clap along to the right things, and we laugh at all the right places. In tragedy, you can't perform. You have to be real. And so for the church to be able to lament alongside that is probably one of the most significant counter narratives.
Thank you, Dr. Ra. We'll have to get dim sum sometime soon.
NBC seafood on that main string.
Yeah. That's my favorite. Yeah, sounds good.
You just messed the whole process up, Dr. Ra. Dr. Ra, I'm gonna pack my stuff up at the church on Sunday and tell them we're done with the performance, show over. This is an amazing time, and certainly I really love how not only the MJA program has been structured, but really this class's connection to how it's really agitating me personally to really look at all of what we call church and even the labels we've put on to change. If we're really going to see real transformation come to our communities, I believe it first must begin with us, but then from us and through us to the community. And that takes courage, specifically in Felipe's context. And how do we outside of that in community support in ways that stretches us beyond what we're accustomed to, and these definitions that we bring to the work in ministry. I'm with you, Dr. Bantu. I didn't know any of this. I fell in love with Jesus and was called to ministry, or what I believe I was called to, and just been running for my life ever since, trying to make sense of that call. Now to be invaded by all of these labels and not to be classified or identified in one particular framework is a challenge. And what I really love is being in relationship with individuals like Kelly, who has challenged. I mean, when I first met Kelly, I was like, oh my God, like, are you really saying these kinds of things in your church meeting? And are you really pushing in these kinds of ways? Because that gives me even not only inspiration, but like, wow, there are some who get it and see it and is willing to see it through other lenses. I don't know what's going to happen at the end of this process. I know June 10th is coming, which is graduation, but what does that really mean? if this doesn't force me to change in real tangible ways.
And that's the process that I hope at least starts in this class. Dr. Bantu has to head out in just a few minutes. I don't know if you had some final words or comments before you head out. We'll keep going till about 7:30.
Yeah, no, nothing final. Yeah, I didn't know if anybody had any more questions I could speak to, but real quick. But yeah, it was great to see everybody, and yeah, man, be looking forward to seeing y'all on the next one.
We'll try to schedule one maybe within 2 weeks. I know we were going to aim for week 9, but again, with the size of the class, we should probably schedule another one within 2 weeks or so. So and then there's a lot more content that we're kind of covering as well. So I know that some of the concern is around the logistics of the class, but completely understand. So if you have those questions, by all means, raise those questions. But this is really a good opportunity to kind of battle around with some of the ideas that are being brought in as well. So let's take a few more questions and we'll try to wrap up by 7:30.
So I think for me, I don't have an official role in the church. I'm just me, right? And here in seminary, learning and growing. So I think I do find there to be a challenge in terms of, here I am having these I guess you're in Samuel's words, like being agitated, right? In terms of like how I'm thinking about evangelism and witness and justice. And also recognizing the context of our church, which is dynamically changing every semester, every year, because it's Boston, right? So every season there's new people coming in. And what does discipleship look like? What does spiritual formation look like when you have new batches of people? And I'm sure this is not unique to Boston. Lots of places have this kind of transiency. But I think about that question, right? How do we build in structures internally in our churches and our formation such that as people come in and out, right? These principles, these guiding lights, these like narratives can be renewed on a daily basis or a yearly basis or seasonal basis. I'd love to hear if anyone has experience in kind of designing these opportunities or spaces, or if that's also a question that you're wrestling with too.
I'll add that because of COVID, probably every church is trying to figure this out in some form or another, right? Because COVID created the disruption, whether that's good or bad or not, it created a disruption that forced churches to rethink some of these things very much more profoundly, right? Talk about transients. You literally had no people not in the church building anymore. That's about as transient as you can get. The entire church had to go online. You can't get more transient than that. And yet, we had churches that couldn't make it through that. And we've had churches that figured it out and somehow flourished in the middle of that. But I would say, some of it is language and imagination that I think what I saw was that churches that went through COVID and just was trying to survive to get to the next stage, many of those churches, I think they'll be able to survive for a little while longer, but long term, I don't think they're going to flourish. I think because they're in survival mode. And it's also regional. Like certain churches in the South, they will survive because they had a particular value system that was going alongside. But the numbers don't look good in the Midwest and West Coast and East Coast. The numbers look really, really bad. And that's where it wasn't simply changing individuals or changing systems and structures. It was narratival and value change, or deepening the narratives and the values that will help survive. I think Anthony had a response to that. Was that you have another question, or did you have a response to Tina's?
Another question.
Oh, okay. Because I want to stay on Tina's question a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll jump to Anthony next.
I'll say this though,
Yeah.
real quick, Dr. Ra and classmates. Yeah, what Tina raised, I think, is very valid. These are conversations that I know I have with Sam and some of my other friends, one Dr. Raw that you know, some others may know, Dr. Peter Watts and some other folks around how we had to really pivot in the pandemic and how there was a level of, it was a level of stripping down and authenticity that happened in the midst of that, because we really got to some of that, and Samuel will appreciate you, some of that old time religion. We kind of got back to what saved us in the first place, what spoke to us when we were once in the pews and got us to the point to where we're in ministry now. And so I think the struggle is, I've looked at it from my parents' church in Texas. Man, they never missed a beat. They just they transitioned from being in the worship space to being virtual, and then people just kept hitting it. Churches out here in the West, especially California, there were several churches that closed. And I'm not going to say, I think in the midst of all of that, we really found out who we were really being called to be. I think we were trying to be a big time church and big time ministry, and we figured out in the midst of that we're really a micro church, that we probably will not grow past 100 people. If I can just get 60 folks to show up every Sunday, men, women, children, cockroaches, the ants, I count them all. If I can just get them all to just show up at one time, the mouse, if I get everybody to show up at the same time, we might have 100. But now we are a house church, and we are living into that and understanding that there's beauty in it, but there's also less stress with trying to be something that we are not. And I think in that conversation, like what Tina said, I think we've discovered who we really are in that. And in this class, understanding that we have certain nomenclature in place that does not apply to churches that look like the one that I pastor. It just doesn't. And do we have to live by that nomenclature? Who set the rules? Who set the narratives? And so the pandemic caused some to understand that we were living by narratives that were not scripted by us, and that it's okay to live into a narrative that's totally countercultural than the one that we may be seeing, or the one that even we grew up in. So
just as a teaser, Unit 6 will talk a little bit about counter narratives. And Tina, I think that's what you're alluding to. How do you generate counter narratives even within an existing system? And I think, I mean, this is weird because this is my old church. So it's kind of really the lines are blurring here. But one of the things when I was pastor there that I kept stressing is the deepening of values, and that the deepening of values has a longer narrative systemic effect, right? Because you can swap out, who's the senior pastor. You can swap out who are the board members. You can swap out who sings in the choir. Those things are doable. It's like the first thing that, pastors, when they come in, one of the first things they want to do is they want to change the entire staff, because those individuals, whatever, they don't get along. I don't know what the scenario is, but you can swap out individuals. And, for a new pastor coming into a church, you can change bylaws. You can do all the little kind of changes and structures and, bring in again, change the system. That's doable. But the thing that can change more deeply long-term is narrative, and that you change values, you change imagination. And that's a little different of a perspective, to change values and imagination and narratives than to change even systems and structures and individuals. Anthony, let's go back to you for one more question, maybe one more after that.
Some of my feelings may be kind of personal to you, Dr. Ra, just reading your books, just wondering how at times I felt like you are one of the narratives, like you are part of the evangelical movement, that you're part of the victim of what you're trying to write against. So what qualifies you to be, what would you do different? Now that you know what you know.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Let me stop there.
Okay. Oh man. Well, one, thank you. I feel really old now. It's like, okay, I'm at the end of my life trying to figure out what I would do different. I still got a few good years left in me. um, I think well, I don't know if I would do this differently, but as I said earlier, I would really go deep with relationships as much as possible. I know that sounds almost trite. Um, and I would be intentional about, and I'm thankful that I was intentional about building relationships kind of across the boundaries and barriers. Um, so I don't think I would be any different. I just would want to go deeper into that. Um, very recently I got to know some folks who um, theologically and ecclesially, I don't think I have anything in common with them in many ways. They're much more conservative. They hold different views on certain issues, but for whatever reason, God kind of opened the door for me to become friends, and realizing that I'm cranky enough to make a lot of enemies. But I don't want to be known for that. And so if there are people who reach out to build bridges and to be, across those boundaries, I would do it without hesitation. Because when you're younger, you're kind of at that space where, like, all right, I don't agree with you. You kind of push people back or pull people in based upon, you know, whatever particular system you have, boundaries you've set. Um, I'm realizing as you go further along that feels very limiting to what God can do. And I'm being purposely vague because, I don't mind telling the names of people that I've gotten close to as good friends over the last few years, but literally they might be in jeopardy if they found out that they were hanging out. These individuals who are much more in conservative circles were hanging out with a Marxist like me. I'm not a Marxist, by the way, but that would be the accusation. You're palling around with Marxists, guy who's, critical race theory guy, and that's where it's ridiculous. Like, and that's where I would say, if those kind of things can be valued, the value of friendship across and relationships across that changes the narrative for me. That those are the places where the narratives can be changed. So I don't know if that's anything different I would do. I just think I would prioritize that a lot more. Yeah, that's kind of within this world, and some of that is based upon the world we live in, right? For me, being in the evangelical world requires an interconnection interpersonally, because that's very, very highly valued, right? And so for the longest time, part of the problem and dilemma was that it was literally a good old white boys network, right? Where the good old white boys just would hang out with each other and they would support each other. And I've written about this, that some of the most, what I wrote about now going on 12 years about the emerging church back about 12, 13 years ago. And people now say, the emerging what? Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. It was like this blip on the radar where a group of white people decided this is what the rest of the world needs to hear. And, I wrote this 13 years ago. I said, a couple of years from now, nobody's going to care about the emerging church. And that's exactly what happened. Nobody gives a blank about the emerging church because it was a flash in the pan. These guys are now, consultants for whatever. That's none of them are planting churches or anything of that sort. Anyway, for me, it would be like, okay, if there's a way to disrupt that, then let's look for the ways to disrupt that. Let's look for ways that we change the narrative. And some of that has meant, in my personal life, being very intentional about who mentors me and who I mentor. And I've written extensively about, I was formed in the Black church because African-American pastors took the time to mentor me. And I, on my part, I made the effort to reach out to Black church pastors in Boston. And Tina, you probably noticed that many of them still connect with Central Square Church. Bishop Green, I was just on the phone with Virginia, and Larry Ward. They're still in the area, and they still, and those are the kind of relationships that I would say I wish, and I do, and I want to go deeper in, and some of that is breaking through the existing boundaries that are already in place. Again, counter narratives. Let's do one more question, and we'll wrap up for our Q&A time today.
Dr. Ra, I don't know that this is a question so much as a if you are considered this danger. I'm around all of my family on both sides, very conservative, very capital E evangelical, and I am not only that, I'm a pastor at a progressive, inclusive, LGBTQ inclusive, welcoming church. That is my that is where witness and justice hits my heart, and really hard. And my church is actually connected with World Vision because of a lot of the social justice that we work with. But that is a topic where the geopolitical arm of evangelicals has just declared war.
Yeah.
And I have a really hard time not going to war in that kind of mindset, and I find it super destructive to relationships, and I'm trying to find a way to maintain relationships, just not even build them, just maintain them in that context.
A couple of things, and then this is one of those land areas filled with landmines. You just have to tread carefully. I will say this, in that particular topic, but more generally around justice issues, follow the money and see how the money shapes these conversations. Follow the money in denominations and how the money shapes those conversations. Follow the money in justice ministries and how certain ministries get better funding than others, and ask, why is that the case? Just follow the money. That doesn't mean you do an IRS accounting, but see why some of these decisions are made, and a lot of it is financial gain or loss that tends to drive it. Yeah.
Well, it's why our church is ecumenical. We're not, and I'm a big fan of that ecumenical. We end up being a little bit of an island.
Yeah, and that's where it's tough. But I know that part is difficult. And I'm not, and I know folks where it's like, yeah, I'm not going to name names, but there's probably a half a dozen people I don't think I could be friends with. I'm not going to name names off the record. I'll tell you, but I can't tell you those names now. There's a half a dozen folks I know I can't be friends with, but there's a whole lot of other folks who are more on the borderline of it, right? I mean, folks who maybe think differently than I do, but at least willing to talk about it, right? And that's the part that's really this difficult to discern right now, right? Because you had, so here's a number: 81% of white evangelicals voted for Trump in 2006, and the 83 number goes up to 83 in 2000. We're talking 2020. We're talking, okay, now what do I do with that mind-boggling stat? Because that means 81% of my friends literally voted against the interests of their fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. Yeah, the well-being of the fellow brothers and sisters in Christ.
I love that. Send it to my husband.
Well, how do we then restore some of those relationships? And I don't know what that looks like. And some of it is just saying the discernment of, okay, there are some that, I have no empathy for, but then there are others that I feel like I can walk alongside. So I'll close with this. I don't think it's in one of the lectures, and this is based upon latest book with Mark Charles. In Unsettling Truth, there's a chapter that begins with Mark's story about how he's driving a car and his brother is in the car and he gets into a car accident. He blacks out. He doesn't remember what happened, but Mark survives and his brother dies. And Mark is like in shock for obvious reasons. And then like a year afterwards, he just gets completely debilitated. So he experienced the trauma, in the car accident, of course, but he doesn't know how to process it because it's survivor's guilt, but it's also feeling like he caused that trauma. He caused his brother's death. So he's trying to figure that out. And so we write about, again, a new area of study that I don't think either of us are experts in, but would love to see others kind of pick this up. The perpetrator-induced trauma syndrome, where the perpetrators feel a trauma. It's different from PTSD, where those are the victims that feel the trauma. But do perpetrators also experience a trauma as well? And you see this like in drone operators in a bunker in New Mexico somewhere. They drop a bomb in Mogadishu, or they drop a bomb in a certain part of the world. And then even though they're literally like playing a video game, they still feel some kind of trauma, even though they're the violators, they're the perpetrators of violence. There's still some kind of shell shock that happens to that drone operator in a bunker in New Mexico. So there is a trauma that goes with even those who perpetrate violence. And the only way I could even stomach thinking about this was Viking Man on January 6th is a traumatized dude. He has been traumatized by white supremacy in a different way that I've been traumatized, and some of y'all have been traumatized by white supremacy. But Viking Man has been traumatized by white supremacy because white supremacy keeps telling Viking Man, you should be ruling the world because you are a superior white male. And he knows he will never live up to that. And so he's traumatized by white supremacy in a way that he doesn't even realize. So he gets up there singing these Christian prayers. You remember that image of these people who stormed the Capitol praying these very evangelical prayers. And when I heard that, I was effing pissed off. But then I said, these brothers, as hard as it is for me to say that, are extremely traumatized. And they've been traumatized by white supremacy. Again, different from any of us, and many of us on this call, but they also have been traumatized by white supremacy. That allows me to at least not hate. Now, that's controversial. Mark and I have gotten a lot of pushback from a lot of different circles about why that's controversial. But it has given me the capacity to say, I can't hate this person because this person, even though he's a perpetrator, has also been victimized by the very thing that he uses to perpetrate others. So anyway, that's just a thought. If anybody's doing a PhD in psychology, would love to see someone write a dissertation on PITS and how that works with white supremacy. I think Sheila Wise Rowe's book is absolutely stunning on how she looks at trauma and race. But it is more from the perspective of those who've experienced it as a victim of racism. The only way I could show compassion is by understanding that the sin and evil of racism hurts the victims the most, but there's also something to be understood about the traumatizer, the victimizer also experiencing. And now again, it's not an excuse in the same way that we would never excuse a sexual violent person. This is not about this. I hate this about racial reconciliation movement about, forgive your tormentors, right? And there was some really bad teaching about this in evangelical circles about victims of sexual violence. You need to forgive those who are violent against you. No, absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. But is there something to process here? And it has helped me not just burn the place down, because I'm looking at these individuals saying, boy, they need Jesus. boy, they are traumatized by white supremacy. So it keeps me from burning places down. Did that get recorded? Yeah, I guess it did. Oh, well. All right, friends. I'm going to edit that last section out. No, I won't. I'm very tempted to edit that last section out. Thank you all for your time. We're going to do this again in a couple of weeks. Dr. Bantu and I will figure out the best time to do this. We're trying to morning, evening, afternoon. We're trying to float it around because of different time zones. But thank you all for your time today. We'll see you online, and we'll see you in our next Zoom session. And we'll take care, everyone.